Hello everyone, this is John from RPGs and More, and in today's video I want to talk about an adventure for the Legendary Adventure game system by Gary Gygax, and this is The Legendary Road. This is an introductory adventure written specifically for this game, and the idea is to introduce your characters to the game and to the system and the campaign world at the same time. So it was written by John Crefeld, Creffled. I'm not sure. The font that this is written in is a very old English style font, and my eyes are having a hard time reading it. But anyway, that's not the point. What makes this module interesting is it actually teaches the mechanics of Legendary Adventures as you are creating your character. In other words, game day has started. Your friends have arrived. You're ready to go. You've been studying the rules. You know what you're doing. Pretty sure about it anyway. And everyone's excited about the new campaign. All right, so then you say, all right, everyone, we finished our session 0 discussion. We generally know what we want to do. So let's break out the books and make characters. And everyone says, yeah, and they get down, and there's another 2 hours or more spent going through books as everyone's passing books around. And, oh, can I borrow that one, please? And, I forgot my copy at home. Can I borrow yours? And the time goes on and things happen. And everyone's, let's say in 2 hours, you get your character finished. And then you've only got maybe 2 hours left in the game session. Probably less than that if you would factor in break time. And if you're like, oh, okay, well, let's get into it. And you're like, cool, we have time for one encounter, and then we've got to end for the night. Okay. Well, with Legendary Road, and thus Legendary Adventures, everyone sits down. They get out their pencil and paper. Scratch paper for right now. They don't need anything else except their dice, I guess. And you start the game session. No one has anything written down, but you start it. And you start by describing the scene. Now, I'm not going to read a whole lot from this module because I don't want to spoil it. Everything here is very spoilerable because it is a very linear module. And some of you might actually be interested in playing in it someday. So, I won't do that. But what I will do is I'll talk about what it does and why it is cool. So it introduces the concept of the role-playing game and what adventurers do one step at a time. The beginning encounters are designed to establish what a role-playing game is through the narration of the dungeon of the game masters, or the legend master, to use the Legendary Adventures term, the LM. So the LM is going to describe the action, but then they're going to describe your characters slowly taking form as a concept through a void. They find themselves on a road, and at each stopping point along this road, they learn something. Well, they have an encounter which makes them realize something about themselves. And as you have each of these encounters, you introduce a new mechanic for the game. And as you introduce these mechanics, you use them right away to solve that encounter one way or another. And so you have an encounter, you realize, oh, I guess I have my basic abilities. I have to know my basic ability scores. So the narration gives you a reason to establish what your basic ability scores are. But instead of establishing just that and then moving on to, well, let's go down now to skills, it now has you solve a puzzle or do something with those ability scores, just them, right away. So you continue the encounter. You complete one encounter, you move on to the next one. And the next one starts establishing the next step in creating your character. Perhaps you're establishing some skills, establishing the idea of what is an adventure. What are you here to do? Are you here to shy away from danger, or are you here to move forwards towards danger? That basic concept is something that you kind of walk through one step at a time in this adventure. And the further you walk along the legendary road, the more fantastical things become, and the more immersed in the world your character gets. So you start out with just putting down the basic mechanics on your sheet, but then it gets into race or ethnicity or background or what have you. Excuse me. Your ancestry and what that means. Excuse me. And what those mechanics are. Each of these things is introduced one at a time. It does advise that first-time players stick with humans. Part of that is because humans are easier to manage through character creation and through gameplay. And the other part of that is because humans being the most common people in most fantasy-based worlds, they'll be easier for someone who has never played an RPG before to be able to get into. Now, if you're confident in that, you can choose one of the other backgrounds if you wish. But the recommendation is, if you're new, start with human. So you go through these things one at a time. Why is that neat? Well, one, it actually harkens to kind of what we're used to with some video games, especially the Elder Scrolls series. They introduce your character to you one concept at a time, one background piece at a time. You learn the mechanics of the game while doing. You know, you're going through an area, and when it's time for you to learn how sneak works, you are given a chance to sneak. And that's the same thing that this does. When it's time for you to learn what various skills do or what various abilities do, you are presented a challenge that requires those abilities in order to solve. And then you kind of understand what those are and you put them down on your sheet. And then you try to solve the problem and move on. None of the problems, for the most part, are deadly. They are dangerous. But your character's probably going to survive. Towards the end, you're going to have an actual combat, an actual fight, in order to kind of go over how fighting works, and that could be potentially dangerous. But for the most part, it's a safe way to learn the mechanics and keep on playing. And again, like I said, this is one module that does it. But actually, I would love to see this for more game systems. The reason why I'm talking about it is because I think this is the best way to teach any role-playing game to anyone. I don't care if you're a new player or if you're a veteran of 100 RPGs. Who the heck wants to come to a new system they've never approached before on game day and be handed the rule book and have to start reading? No one wants to do that. You'd much rather get in the game as quick as possible. That's what you're here for. You're here to roll the dice. You're here to be part of the adventure. And there's so many ways that we can take our standard adventures and the usual starting adventure and turn them into this kind of tutorial scenario and make character creation part of it. So like for example, for the Cypher system, break the character into the different components of its of what it is. So you start out with a descriptor and then a generic type. And the generic type could be hero. Hero, it has 8 in all of your pools. And then your descriptor. And then you basically say, so I'm going to be a strong hero, or I'm going to be a tough hero. And so all the things that have to deal with those descriptors get added to the character sheet, plus these 8 in each of the pools. And once you've written that down, that tough hero is then presented with their first challenge that they need to fulfill. And those challenges can be fulfilled or completed only with that information that you have. It teaches you the mechanics of how the game works. The next encounter could teach how effort and edge function, and have something that needs to the player needs to apply effort and edge into the role in order to succeed. And then they move on to the next thing, and the next thing is all about a different aspect of the cipher, maybe GM intrusions and understanding what that is, but it may turn it into an encounter. Each encounter along the way teaching each of the players something about their characters, about how each ability score works. So there's one thing that's all about your strength and how strength works, and so it teaches you that. And the next encounter is all about speed, and it teaches you how speed works. The next one's all about intellect, and it teaches you how intellect works. So we can do the same thing with D&D. So you start off with a blank piece of paper and you say, okay, everyone give your character a name and a basic idea of what you want your character to look like, and let's get going. And you start off in, maybe we're doing the Lost Mines of Phandelver, and you say, okay, well, we'll just, why don't we just roll up ability scores real quick? Brum, 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 write them down. You're not touching equipment, you're not touching anything. You're just writing down ability scores and the modifiers. And then they face the goblins in that ambush. Maybe you tone down those goblins a little bit, because now you know that they're not going to have all of their tools with these goblins, but you have a goblin ambush. And the players kind of get to, maybe the players weren't necessarily guards, but were actually merchants themselves, or commoners themselves, kind of walking along with a merchant, and they happen to get ambushed by the goblins while traveling along that road. And so therefore then, suddenly they're picking up their fists and they're trying to punch these goblins out while these goblins are attacking them with, like bows or little daggers or something. And then they recover equipment from the goblins, and depending on who picks up what kind of equipment, that gives you an idea of what kind of character they want to play. Maybe one of the goblins was the goblins all kind of had knives and bows, and so like people pick up knives and like, yeah, and one of the goblins had a shield, and so someone grabs the shield, and you're like, oh, they're interested in armor, cool, and then move on to the next encounter, and the next encounter is slightly more difficult. It adds a few more things to it. You can start talking about class based upon what equipment the people have picked up. It kind of says, oh, okay, this looks like you're more interested in the martial side of things. Maybe you picked up that scroll that one of the goblins had, so you're probably a little more interested in playing a magical type person, and kind of go from there. And start introducing each of the aspects of the classes, one item at a time, with every encounter. And I think that is a really cool way to introduce the system. It can be done with D&D, especially with the old school D&D. It's a lot easier there. But you can do it with the modern D&D as well. You can do it with Fate. Might be a little harder with Fate. I think Fate's pretty amorphous from what I remember. But anything that has like lots of crunch, you can manage this with this kind of system, because it'll teach the crunch one step at a time, and it will turn your character creation into part of the story, and your characters will feel more grounded. And suddenly that first encounter, Wilhelm is an important character now, because Wilhelm is someone that you've actually already gone through an adventure with, in the process of creating who Wilhelm is. And that's kind of cool. I kind of like that idea. It's very emergent storytelling. It's not sitting down and writing up a background before you even arrive at the table. It is figuring out who your character is as you're playing, as we are playing at the table. I think that's a really cool idea. I hope more game designers make this sort of thing. In fact, this is the kind of adventure that I think, personally, people should include in their main rule books. Instead of having a lengthy character creation chapter, or maybe, in addition to, have a story-like adventure that introduces each of the elements of the character one step at a time. And then the player gets to game through creating their character. Maybe put that first and then have the general character creation rules afterwards in the next chapter. That way people that are already familiar with your system can kind of skip that chapter and go to the next one and keep going. But the tutorial is still an option. And I think that this, for Legendary Adventures, this is a whole separate adventure. For a system that someone is creating, I think that this would benefit by including it in the main rulebook, because it teaches the game more so than just having an example of play does. The examples of play are interesting. They're great. I love seeing them. I am not knocking them. They are great. Please include examples of play in any game book that you're writing for any system, because it's important for us newbies to your system to understand the intention of what you're saying. But make sure that the rules you're following in your example of play are the same ones you have written down in your how to play section. Don't house rule your example of play. Some people forget that, and it's kind of funny when you catch, like, hey, that's not how that rule is supposed to work. According to what's written right over here, what's the difference? Why did that happen? I don't know. And then you talk to the author, like, oh yeah, I forgot. I made the example of play in my first draft, and I kind of changed things during the second and third draft, and I forgot to update the example of play. Okay, fair enough. Kind of makes the example of play a little useless, but thanks. Thanks for your honesty. Hi, that was me, by the way. That was with one of my play testers. But the idea here is having a pathway through character creation that is part of the game, instead of just an example of play, demonstrates not only how to create your character, but it also demonstrates your intention about how you want your game to be run. How you want, what's important to your game when you're designing it. And I think that's something that's important for us as indie designers to really think about, because let's be fair, we are looking for a niche audience within a niche audience. And so we can do stuff like that and get away with it because we're not trying to be mass market appeal stuff. And if you are trying to be mass market appeal stuff, good on you. Good luck. And I mean that honestly. No, seriously, good luck. Like, not even kidding. Good luck to you. And I hope that everything happens. But these adventures that kind of teach how we're supposed to play, what everything means in context to a game session, in context to the kind of stories you want your game system to be telling. It really, boiling it down, it puts everything in context, and context is king. Or queen, if you wish. So yeah, that's why that adventure's cool. That's why that concept is cool. That's why I'd like to see more of it. Please. Thank you all very much for coming by. I hope that my ramblings have been at least moderately entertaining. If you have enjoyed what you have seen in this video, I would appreciate a like and maybe subscribe. Maybe leave a comment. maybe give your cat some scritches for me? Let's see how many question marks I can fit on the end of these sentences. Mm, mm, yep. Anyway, thank you so much. Peace be with you. I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye bye.